Great, man. I'm ready to go.
Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We appreciate you taking time today. Perhaps some of you are back at work. If you were off for St. Patrick's Day, we rescheduled for that reason, and we appreciate you sticking with us and being here today. If you're not familiar with Care Patrol, we are a placement and referral agency. We guide and advocate for healthcare options for our clients, and we're paid by assisted living or in-home care sitters that we recommend. However, only about 20% of the people who call us. So we do a lot of education around Medicare and Medicaid and Medicaid preparedness. And so our series of hours also touches on those. We do try and bring topics that are brought to us by folks on previous calls. And by the way, we're accredited by the Board of Social Work Examiners in Alabama, as well as the Alabama Board of Nursing, to provide 1.0 contact hour for today's course. And again, usually these are suggested to us, but today's course came by a sort of, I think, divine meeting. I met Mr. Rogers' wife at a painting class, and she facilitates a class at UAB that may interest y'all. And I think it's in the School of Public Health or else Health Administration, around resources for folks that have little resources. So it's I think a wonderful class. She suggested her husband would be an ideal presenter for us, and I'm excited about our topic today, and I will get to it in just a moment. Good day, Miss Lynch. Thank you for saying something. And by the way, we love it. I talked to Mr. Rogers moments ago, and he feels, as I do, that this is much more impactful for everyone involved if you will join in our discussion. You can
Absolutely
raise your hand and ask to unmute or add to the chat room. If you're new to Zoom, the chat room you can find by moving your cursor to the top of your screen. A bar will pop down. If not, move it down. A bar will pop up. On that bar is the word chat, and you can join in the discussion. As some of you know who've been with us, this is considered a live hour by the Board of Social Work because we have a password protected evaluation that we provide the password at the end of today. So listen for that. For those of you, hello, Miss Calder in Oxford, Alabama. For those of you that would like to write the link down who are participating by away from your desk or however, if you can't see the screen, I'm pasting it in the chat room. The link today is https:// www.surveymonkey.com/ lowercase r / all uppercase letters with numbers, Z as in zoo, W 3, S as in sheriff, 8, W as in Wayne, 6. That's our password protected link for today. Listen for the password, and y'all get ready to listen to what I think is going to be a very engaging hour with Wayne Rogers from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Sean. It's so great to be with y'all. I'm just so happy to be here. I was telling Sean I get to do a good number of presentations on behalf of Sheriff Mark Petway, who is my boss. He's the sheriff of Jefferson County. I saw some folks from Jefferson County jumping in, and glad to have y'all here. Saw some folks from Georgia and Kentucky jumping in too. That's great. I have a granddaughter who lives in Louisville, so if you're up close to her, say hi. Also have two other grandkids live in New York City that just got back from going to a first birthday party up there, Sean. So, but it's good to be with y'all today. And so I'm executive assistant to Sheriff Petway, and what that means is I do whatever the heck the sheriff tells me to do. Uh, and and one of the things that he tells me to do, one of the things he has got me involved in, he actually, by trade, I'm a lawyer. I think Sean, I think my wife told Sean that when they met. But I practice law, been practicing law for about 37 years. And but 6 years ago, when Sheriff Mark Petway got elected, a little over 6 years ago, he called me up a few days after the election and said, "Wayne, I want you to come work for me." And I was like, "What in the world would I do, man?" And he said, "Well, I know about your interest in mental health, and you're interested in making sure that people with addiction issues and alcoholism and substance use disorder and things like that are taken care of right in the county. And I'm very interested in that too. And I want you to come in and do some work on that." So when we got to the sheriff's office, there just wasn't a whole lot of that being done. And one of the things that sheriff asked me to do was sort of investigate what types of programs were out there. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background of where crisis intervention team training started. It actually started in Memphis, Tennessee in 1988. And what happened in Memphis is a very sad situation. There was a young man who was mentally ill. He was about 20 years old, and he got in a confrontation with police, and the young man ended up dead. Of course, at first there were some protests and things like that about the killing of it was a young black man killed by a white police officer. And there were some protests and things that went on. But the local board, the local chapter of the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, which I'm sure a lot of folks on this call know what NAMI is, familiar with NAMI. We have a NAMI Alabama, we have a NAMI Birmingham, but the NAMI Memphis president came to the Memphis police department and said, "Hey, I just don't think your guys did this right. I don't think these folks treated this young man the way they should have. We would like to help you in developing a program and how to teach police officers to deal with people who have mental illness, who have addiction, who have substance use disorder, and those types of things." So it got assigned to a guy who at the time was a lieutenant and eventually became a major in the Memphis Police Department. His name was Sam Cochran. Sam is still alive, and he's chairman of the board of the organization that I have now become a board member for after these years now working with Sheriff Petway. I'm on the board for a group called Crisis Intervention Teams International. And it truly is international. We do this training around the world. We have programs in Spain and the Philippines and Canada. We actually have a board member from Canada, Mexico, Guam, Australia, Italy. There are places all over the world that have taken this model that was developed right there in Memphis, Tennessee, on how to train police officers in dealing with folks with mental illness. Just to tell you guys a little bit about this. Do y'all remember? There might be some folks out there who remember. Just a few years ago, there was a young man in Rochester, New York. He was completely naked, wandering the streets of suburban Rochester, New York, carrying a gun and threatening to shoot people with it. Well, let me just tell y'all, a young man who is naked wandering around suburban Rochester, New York with a gun is not a criminal. By the actions that person is taking, they're dealing with a mental illness. And this young man had a serious mental illness. He, just like the young man in Memphis, ended up confronting police. They threw a blanket over him. Eventually, the young man suffocated to death. So what we try to do is teach police officers that dealing with a criminal and dealing with someone who has mental illness are two very, very different things, two very, very different ways to deal with them. And our organization and the sheriff's office here, CITI International, all the folks who do crisis intervention team training, our goal is to teach police officers how to specifically deal with people who are dealing with mental illness, people with substance use disorders, people with all types of mental illness. Because just to tell you what happened before we got there, here's the way a mentally ill person would be treated in Jefferson County, Alabama. And this is the way some of them still are treated around the country. Someone who's mentally ill and their family's been having to deal with them for years and years and years. They know they've got a serious mental illness. The family has had them in and out of care for many, many years. So that person makes some sort of a threat to a neighbor, to a sister, to a mother, to a son. They make some sort of a threat and they call 911. when 911 gets called, what has typically happened was mostly been done by law enforcement in America, or what by the American crisis care system. When you call 911, the first people that come are usually going to be the police. So the police would get dispatched out there, and this is what we found when we got to the sheriff's office in 2019. Police would be dispatched out there, and they come out, they talk to the mom, they talk to whoever made the call, and they're like, "Hey, I have someone who's dealing with paranoid schizophrenia. He's had this his whole life. I don't know what to do. He made a threat to our neighbor." And so, what's the police officer going to do? You know what their one option was in 2019, Jefferson County, Alabama? Put the handcuffs on him, put him under arrest, put him in the back of the cruiser, take him to the jail, book him into the jail. So you know what happens once they get booked into the jail? They would then get sent into usually in an isolated area, because a lot of times there's a significant question when these folks are brought in: are they a threat to commit suicide? And a lot of times they are, honestly, because they're already in a crisis. If they weren't in a crisis, they wouldn't have made the threat in the first place. So they're dealing with a crisis situation. So while they're dealing with this crisis situation, they get put into isolation. What do you think that happens to the crisis? It just makes it worse. And what we found in 2019 is there was no full-time mental health nurse or nurse practitioner there at the jail. So what we said was, first thing we got to do is we got to get a full-time mental health trained nurse practitioner at the jail. So we got that done. We also hired a licensed professional counselor to work at the jail. She's fantastic. She came into the jail. Then we hired 2 social workers to work with these folks, because what we found was happening was, do you think these folks ended up in prison? No, they didn't end up in prison. What happened was they would sit for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Honestly, the average time was 6 weeks sitting in the jail waiting for the DA, because once there's an arrest and a charge, then the DA's office gets involved. So 6 weeks later, an assistant DA will come into the jail and start talking to folks and say, "Well, what happened?" "Well, they threatened the neighbor with a butter knife," or whatever it was. And you think the DA is going to spend time prosecuting that case? No, they're not going to prosecute that case. That's not the kind of people the DA wants to take to trial in criminal court in Jefferson County, Alabama, or anywhere. They have a mental illness. Has it been treated in the jail? But up through 2019, generally it had not been. They had not dealt with a peer. They had not dealt with a counselor. They had not dealt with a social worker. And they had just gotten worse over the 6 weeks that they were there. So what would happen is the assistant DA sort of looks at the person who brought the case, the person who made the call, the person who made the 911 call, talk to the police officer, and everybody's like, "This person's mentally ill. They just need some help." So what does the assistant DA do? They dismiss the charges. And the person is released back to their family. Person goes back in. And what we found, y'all, one person cycled through this 17 times. We investigated, saw one guy 17 times, arrested, sat in the jail for a month, rotated back out. Arrested, sat in the jail for a month, rotated back out. 17 times. Never sent to prison, never was a criminal. Was just someone who was dealing with mental illness. So we said there's got to be a better way, right? So we start casting about, looking around, who's got the best program. So what we came up with was that what was originally done as the Memphis model, and what we do now in the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office is we train all of our officers. Now, let me say, that is somewhat controversial. The decision to train all the officers is somewhat controversial. Many sheriff's offices, many police departments train only a very limited number of officers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But there are 2 different philosophies. One is you train all your officers in how to deal with folks with mental illness. And one is you train only a very specific small number of officers to deal with them. So that small group can be the ones who are called out when these situations arise. Sheriff wanted to take the philosophy of, let's train everyone in the 16-hour class as opposed to the 40-hour class. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen now and show you guys what we do. Let me see if I can find this one. The first thing I want to find on my screen is this one right. Nope, that's not the one. It's this one right here. There we go. So I'm going to share this screen with you right here. All right. Can everybody see that right there?
Yes.
Y'all see the screen okay? All right.
Yes.
So this is a typical 16-hour training schedule that we put these folks through. This is actually the one that we did on January 28th and 29th of 2025. So we start out talking about the course overview, and that's just what we started talking to y'all. The CIT philosophy is that it's the three-legged stool philosophy. And I know everybody knows, you've heard folks talk about the three-legged stool. The three-legged stool of crisis intervention team training is law enforcement, the mental health treatment community, that is medical professionals, and then the families and peers. That's the folks from NAMI. So you think about the law, the actual law enforcement officers, the people who do the treatment, and then the folks who are part of the families that are being treated. So you see this represented throughout this training that we do. So Tommy Black is the director of our Sheriff's Academy. The Sheriff's Academy is out in Fultondale for those in Jefferson County. You might have been out there. Some people call it the shooting range, but we got Academy out there. It's the only Sheriff's Academy in the state of Alabama. And it is certified by CITI to train folks in crisis intervention team training. So we talked to them about that. What is CIT? What is our particular CIT plan? Now, what I should say to y'all is we made it a goal to train all of our folks, and we have, except for just a few stragglers here and there, over the course of the 4 years that we've now been doing this. We got our program certified. We had it certified in 2020. Everybody knows what happened then, right? So just as we were about to get our certification done, COVID hit, and we had to wait a year. But we got everything certified in 2021, and we started training folks. And we've trained. There are 550 deputies in Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. About 500 of those have been trained in CIT. Plus, what we found was a lot of interest in this program. Once we got the certified program, we started having the city of Birmingham call, the city of Hoover call, the city of Gardendale call, and then Coleman County, and then Blount County, and then Shelby County. And so we have now actually trained folks from all over the state. We've had folks from Mobile to Huntsville, and well, I'll tell you what, I'll hold this, but we also have gotten into training folks from the VA, which we'll talk about in just a little while.
We have a comment, actually.
Yeah.
Jacqueline Ruffin, excuse me, says, I currently work for the crisis line in Georgia, and we have difficulty getting law enforcement involved. Some counties do have co-responders with officers that are being implemented.
Yep. That's absolutely right. And that's one of the things that that I was going to talk about in a little while, but I'll go ahead and talk about it now, is that there are two different models of CIT. One is where you just send law enforcement out to respond, and one is where you send law enforcement with a co-responder. The co-responder is someone who is in the second leg of that stool. They're a treatment person. Sometimes it's a social worker, sometimes it's a licensed professional counselor, sometimes it's a nurse. There are different places. Portland, Oregon has a co-responder model. Colorado has a co-responder model. Arizona has a co-responder model. So these are some of the places that I actually traveled to investigate how they did crisis care. Y'all, Arizona's crisis care system is 20 years ahead of ours. They started doing this stuff way back in the 90s. They started doing crisis care. Now, that's a little different from crisis intervention team training, but it's two things that work hand in hand, very tight together. The crisis intervention model that a state follows, and then the crisis intervention team training that we do for law enforcement. If you don't train your law enforcement people properly in CIT, you will never get that crisis intervention model to work right, because they've got to be a part of that. And sometimes a co-responder will go out there. There are some counties, particularly in the West now, particularly in Oregon, and the vice president of our board is from rural Oregon. They have a few counties there that have gone away from a co-responder model to a model where if they know the individual, now they have to know the individual, they have to understand who it is. It has to be somebody they've dealt with before. But if they know the individual, they won't even send a law enforcement officer with them. They will just send a social worker or an LPC out to the person. Yeah, Sean, you got something else?
Yeah, Mr. Doyle, Jason Doyle, says that, I believe he's saying that he is a co-responder for Etowah County.
Oh, nice.
Social worker.
That's great. Fantastic. Yeah, that's Alabama lets each county make a decision on how they're going to do it. Now, Jefferson County does not have a co-responder model yet. Our view is we don't have quite enough social workers yet to do this. We don't have, so we've been, excuse me, Got a little bit of a cough there, Sean. Sorry about that, y'all. But we do not use a co-responder model yet. We only send out law enforcement. Now we do. Our law enforcement folks are all equipped with iPads that connect to our local crisis care center. So our co-responder is virtual. So there are opportunities if a deputy gets on scene and realizes they need some advice from a nurse or a social worker or someone who's back at the crisis care center, they can call in with their iPad and actually talk to them about, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. Can I get some help? Now, this is typically, of course, when you have multiple law enforcement officers on the scene. One's dealing with the, making sure everybody's safe. The other one's back in, talking to the person on the iPad, getting advice from the co-responder. But that's really cool. I'm glad that we have somebody on here who actually does this work, and it is valuable and amazing work. So let's talk about the agenda here. So what we do first, we just spend most of the first day anyway, is spent sort of teaching law enforcement officers what mental illness is, because folks didn't go into law enforcement to learn about mental health. That's not something they're particularly interested in. Most of them went to law enforcement because they want to see a better society. They want to go out and arrest bad guys. That's what they like to do. Some of them go into it because they want to work at the jail. Some of them go to it, to do CSI type stuff and all that. But most of them are just in it to try to keep y'all safe. And what we train over and over and over, I try to hammer into the heads of these young law enforcement people, especially, safety is your first priority. When you're in law enforcement, that's the first thing you do. And keeping people with mental illness safe is part of your job. So we teach them about mood disorders, psychotic disorders, personality disorders. And you see, we have folks from UAB. UAB is so supportive of our program. They have doctors, PhDs, they have medical doctors come and train. They send nurses out to help us with the training. Susan Beatty Pierce, you see that name right there on my screen. She's the president of NAMI Birmingham. Just to give you a little of her background, she has been working for the Alabama to try to improve the Alabama crisis care system since the mid 80s. 40 years she's been trying to do this. And she does it because of her brother. She had an older brother who landed up in the Jefferson County Jail in the 80s, but it was just mental illness. He was not a criminal. He should not have been there. And she started working for him. And 40 years later, what Susan will tell you now is we're finally getting it right. And we're getting it right with CIT and the crisis centers. All right. So
There's
then
some
you
more
look at,
comments. I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Wendy, and I'm going to not pronounce her last name correctly. I should. It's Sfakianos, I believe.
Mhm.
It says there are plenty of social workers out there who, I'm sure, would love to do something like that. A lot of social workers who needs jobs, and then Mrs. Dunn or Ms. Dunn, Brigitte Dunn, or Bridget, I would be interested.
Okay.
Qualifications?
Well, y'all, we are working towards it. Let me say that. More to come, because this system is evolving every day, and we'll talk about it in a little while. The budget money that the state has set aside for this crisis system has been kind of incredible. And it all traces back. I'll go ahead and talk about that. I was going to talk about this later, but I'm going to go ahead and say it now. The whole change in Alabama's budgeting for the mental health, for the Alabama Department of Mental Health, changed with one meeting. Now, if you want to know the power of one person talking to the right person about the right thing, the president of NAMI in Rainsville, Alabama, went to talk to a little, at the time, a little known legislator named Nathan Ledbetter. Does anybody recognize that name now? Nathan Ledbetter is now the Speaker of the Alabama House of Representatives. But at the time, he was sort of a backbench new legislator, and he didn't deal with any mental illness in his family, didn't have any problem with it. But a lady from Rainsville, Alabama, whose son had committed suicide because of mental illness, went in to tell Nathan Ledbetter the state needs to do something about this. They've cut mental health funding. The Robert Bentley administration slashed mental health funding by about 40%. A lot of folks on this call probably know about that. So this funding, in 2010, we had proration, we had a slash in funding, and that's when they closed most of the beds around the state. People who were being held at long-term beds, they closed most of them, just left Bryce and Bryce open and Taylor Hardin open, and then just a few beds elsewhere. Closed a lot of that. They're supposed to put all that stuff in the community health centers, just never happened. But Nathan Ledbetter made it his mission after meeting with this mom. He said, I'm going to do something about it. And then a few years later, he becomes Speaker of the House. And funding, mental health funding in Alabama has increased by almost 200% since that day by that one lady having that one meeting with that one legislator. And he's really made things different. And we, in the Jefferson Blunt St. Clair Mental Health Authority, and when I say we work with them hand in glove. Jim Kriego and his folks at JBS Mental Health Authority, we work with them very closely on our crisis care center here, which is a 24/7, 365, no wrong door facility. If you're dealing with a mental health crisis or an addiction crisis in Jefferson County, Alabama, you get to go. You can walk in on your own. You can have your family bring you, or if the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office picks you up and realizes that's where you need to go instead of the jail, that's where we take you. Yeah, Sean, you got something else?
Yes, Ms. Stewart, Lauren Stewart is asking, have you all thought to include hospital with psych units for those that have repeated calls?
Yes. So what happens to these folks that go to the crisis care center? And I hope I'm answering this question right, but I'll go this way, and then if it's not right, y'all can let me know. So what happens to these folks who we take to the crisis care center? And I'll say for various reasons, the reason we work so hard on this crisis intervention team training, Sean, is that if you take the person, if one of our deputies, one of our patrol deputies, if they take them to the jail and book them in and charge them with a crime, they lose the ability to take them to the crisis care center. Now, the person can go the other way. If you go to the crisis care center first, and then the crisis care center says, I'm not sure we can do this. Person's too violent. The person, we're afraid of what they did. We think they might do something worse. You can take them to the jail and arrest them and put them under arrest and take them to jail and charge them with a crime and all that. You can't do it the other way. Once the charge is registered, once our deputy swears out the warrant and issues the charge, then it has to be dealt with by the DA's office, like we were talking about earlier. Now, things are very different in the jail now, because that person does get to see a peer. They do get to see social workers. They do get to see mental health nurse practitioners, and a psychiatrist comes by once a week and that sort of thing. But so things are different, and they're treated better while they're in the jail, but we don't want them in the jail. And what we are estimating is that since this crisis care center opened 2 years ago this week, by the way, it opened March 15th of 2023. Since it opened, they've been seeing 350 people a month more recently. Now, the first couple of months, they saw about 100 people a month, but now, more recently, they're seeing 350 people a month there. And about 50 of those are people that we would have taken to the jail.
Wow.
People that would have landed up in our jail. Instead, 50 of them are being taken straight into crisis care. And a lot of it is because of this training that we're doing to get the law enforcement officers to know where to take these folks.
Miss Mims is asking, Lakedra Mims, can anyone attend the training?
Yes, I tell you what, I will give y'all my email at the end, and you can email me and let me know you want to attend. And so the training, we do generally limit it to people who are in the field, but social workers can attend, nurses can attend, law enforcement folks can attend. People are interested in it. And honestly, we have trained over 1,000 people now. So that's in either the 16-hour or the 40-hour, which I'm going to talk to y'all about in just a minute. The 16-hour is sort of the entry-level training, and we do it about 5 or 6 times a year. The 40-hour training we do 3 times a year, and it's a much more extensive. And once you complete that training, you become a certified mental health officer. And there's a little you become someone that a dispatcher, someone who's at 911 might just call you specifically and say, and that's when I said Huntsville. I'll give you that. The city of Huntsville, and Johnny Hollingsworth is one of my mentors in this area. City of Huntsville has been doing this training for longer than Jefferson County Sheriff's Office has. And Johnny and his folks, they have the philosophy that they're going to have about 10 officers, really well-trained mental health officers. And those 10 are the only ones they're ever going to send out on mental health calls. For us, we took the opposite philosophy, get everybody to 16-hour training so they all know what it's like. And every single patrol deputy and every single jail deputy, which is a little bit controversial, but we use only deputies in the jail. We don't use jailers. We use actual Jefferson County Sheriff's Office deputies to run our jail. And we want all our jail folks trained in it. We want all our patrol folks trained in it. Honestly, we want everybody. Anyone who might even be in one of those two areas to be trained in mental health. And honestly, the warrant people need it worse than anybody, because the warrant people, they tend to go out when they're serving a warrant. They want to know, are they dealing with someone who is mentally ill, and how to treat that person differently. I'm just going to give you all the very basic, because we're already 30 minutes into our time, and I
Well,
got a
we've
lot
got
to
more
say.
comments. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's all right. It's all right. Let me say this real quick. The one of the biggest things that we teach law enforcement officers, they like to yell at people. I mean, y'all have probably seen, yeah, I bet everybody on this call has seen a police officer yell at somebody, right? And they kind of like to do that. I mean, that's one reason they want to, they can yell at people. Many mental illnesses, and y'all probably know this better than I do, the worst thing you can do is yell at the person, especially somebody who is going into a shell, into some kind of a crisis of their own. They're hearing things inside their head, and yelling at them is the worst thing you can do. One of our founders at CITI does a demonstration with where he gets somebody in the audience to pretend that they're coming at him with a knife. And he deals with them first as if they are a criminal who's trying to hurt him with a knife. And he shows you how to deal with that. And basically, you do yell at them. That's what you do. Put that knife down. I'm going to shoot you if you don't put that knife down. Things like that. You give them ever more dire warnings until, if they're criminal and they're not mentally ill and they're just trying to hurt somebody, sometimes, and there's plenty of case law out there, sometimes law enforcement officers have to take action, and they end up injuring the person or killing the person. Dealing with a mentally ill individual who's also holding a knife, and they're coming at you as if just in the same way the criminal, he then demonstrates how you're supposed to deal with that person. And it is the opposite of yelling at them. You very calmly and rationally talk to them. You use language that tells you how you understand what they're going through. Now, I will tell you, it is not easy to train a law enforcement officer the difference between the two. But this is what we try to do. So let me go, Sean, if you wouldn't mind, before we get to our next comments, let me go through the rest of this
Sure.
16-hour training here. And because you see, most of it, the first day is mostly just talking about the different disorders that you might deal with. And those substance and addiction disorders, John Bales from the Recovery Resource Center comes in and does that. Then we have our VA folks come in and talk about suicide prevention. VA suicides, y'all know suicides among veterans are just at an epidemic level. And so we invited these folks in. They liked our training so much that they set a national model for the VA that we now teach at the VA Medical Center here in Birmingham at the East Clinic. And we have trained about 150 VA law enforcement officers from all around the country. We have people coming from Pennsylvania, from Georgia, from South Carolina, from Florida to do their 40-hour training here in Birmingham because of Kelly Arthur, who is a social worker at the VA, and Sergeant Tim Yearwood, who's a VA police officer. So then let me see if I can roll down here to the second day. Oh, nope, that's it. Wait a minute. Something's wrong. Oh, I know what's happening. I got to click out of my sound. Okay, here we go. So that's the first. So then the second day of the 16-hour training, I talk about mental health laws and commitments. And a lot of people on here probably know the difference between a voluntary commitment and involuntary commitment. But I'll just tell you real quick, some folks are so far down into their crisis, they just don't know what kind of help they need. And so there is a legal process by which their family or a law enforcement officer or someone who just cares about them can get them involuntarily committed into treatment. Now, there's a long story about how Alabama and the whole country treated those people so horribly. If you've seen some of the old ways that mental health was done, if you've seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or anything like that, you know how it used to be. And one thing I always tell people, Sean, is Alabama is a place where that changed. I don't know if everybody knows this, but there's a case called Wyatt versus Stickney that was filed in 1970. And when it was filed, there were 9,000 Alabamians at Bryce Hospital and a place called Searcy Hospital down in South Alabama. The white ones were in Tuscaloosa and the black ones were in South Alabama as a rule. And those folks, by and large, were not mentally ill. They were, by and large, they were people, they were women, battered women who had told their husband they wanted a divorce. And the husband said, well, you're crazy. Went to the probate judge and got his wife committed to Bryce. And she would stay there for the rest of her life. And, there are cemeteries down there all filled with the women who went through this for 2 generations. This is the way we treated these folks. But Alabama is a place where that changed. And Judge Frank Johnson rendered the first in the nation decision that said, if you commit someone to because of a mental illness and don't treat the mental illness, you violated their constitutional rights. And so they started letting those folks out. So going through here real quick. So I teach about all that. Then we do de-escalation communication, talking about the stuff I was talking about a minute ago. Don't yell at them, give some sort of understanding. Call them by their first name. This is an amazing thing that I've seen work. And I'll give y'all a story in just a second. I've seen it work or seen video of it working where calling the mentally ill individual by their first name sometimes it just has such an effect on them because it lets them know that you care about them, you're thinking about them, you want to help them and offering them the help. And so then that afternoon, we do the de-escalation scenarios, de-escalation strategies, and show police officers we'll do things like, okay, here's your scenario. And I've got one of these that I'll show to y'all in a minute, but we tell them a scenario like, you've encountered someone who is standing on a ledge, threatening to commit suicide. How do you talk with that person? And we let the officers in the training, they actually go through it. We'll have one of them volunteer. Actually, we have some of our social workers come in to play the folks who are mentally ill because they know how to do those roles. They've done them so many times. I'll sometimes go in and play one of those folks. And we have the law enforcement officers just contemporaneously try to figure out what to do. How do I talk to this person? So anyway, Sean, tell me, I know we got some more comments now, so I'll take a break there, but just to lay on that's what the 16-hour looks like. And I'll go to the 40-hour in a second.
That's intriguing. Miss Cloud, Chelsea Cloud, said, I am a product of this legislation and push for more mental health funding. She's a school mental health counselor. And then we have 4 more new messages.
Nice. Oh,
Lisa
that's great.
Hurd, I worked in a psych hospital in Portland, and the teams we worked with for repeat patients were absolutely the best, even at 3 a.m.
Wow.
Joy Lynn Suddock says, great question. I want to attend as well. And Ms. Calder asked if there's a cost to attend.
Generally, there's not. We generally provide it free to anybody that we think needs it. If you we don't charge folks now. If you need to stay overnight, obviously you have to get a hotel room close by or whatever. But we don't generally charge people to come. We actually got a grant to put this training on. We got a 3-year grant program. The grant's ended now, but we're still doing the training anyway. We're actually have applied for a new grant to try to help us fund it. But most of the people do this volunteer. The folks from UAB, they just love the program so much they'll come out and volunteer to help us. So it doesn't cost anything other than our time to put it on, and so there's not really any cost to it. Now you can join CIT International, and I think it's citinternational.org is the website. You can join that organization. I think it's like $25 a year, and Sean, we put on a national conference every year. This year it's in Anaheim, California, walking distance to Disneyland.
All right.
So that it's in August every year. And I'll give y'all a little inside information. This is not anything public, but I'm going to tell y'all anyway because I'm on the board. Then we've got the next 4 conferences set. It's Anaheim this year, Orlando next year, close to Universal Studios. The year after that's in New Orleans, and the year after that is in Dallas. So not that far to travel for the next 3. This one's in Anaheim, so it's kind of far out there. But the next 3 are fairly close to us. And it's a 3-day conference with a bonus day on Sunday, usually in August. The bonus day, they do things like train the trainer classes. There's a VA roundtable. There are different, classes and these classes do cost. If you want to do these classes, they do cost to go to. But the conference itself is Monday, Tuesday, and half a day Wednesday. And you finish, and usually you can fly back home on Wednesday. But there's people from all 50 states attend this conference every year, plus all those countries I was telling you about. Actually, we had 10 people from Ukraine come last year.
Hmm.
They're starting a CIT program in Ukraine based on this model. And a lot of it is to train, because there's so much mental illness, so much PTSD from the front lines of Ukraine. They're having to treat mental illness a lot more than they were having to before. So they've got people coming in needing this training. Their law enforcement folks are needing this kind of training. So, all right, so I've pulled up a 40-hour course now. I'm going to show you a little bit of difference. This is something for someone to become a certified mental health officer. This is what they go through. So let me get a sip of water.
Mr. Doyle says he attended the 40-hour with the VA. It was an awesome experience
Nice.
and it was free.
Well, there you go. And was I there? I hope I was.
And Ms. Calder says she'll be glad to stay longer. This is very interesting and important. Ms. Hurd says, how do we find out if our county has this program? I'm in Montgomery County.
Okay, Montgomery County has definitely had some people trained in CIT. I know they have taken more of the philosophy of the Huntsville folks of training a limited number of officers, but that's totally fine. I mean, it's a model that they're starting to follow too. For my English speaking friends in the room, let me start that sentence over. Sheriff Derek Cunningham is a friend of Sheriff Mark Petway, who's our sheriff here, and he definitely has sent some of his folks up for this training. So they're definitely involved in it. And there is a crisis care center in Montgomery as well. It's not a 24/7, 365, at least it wasn't last time I knew. To let y'all know, it's $7 million a year in crisis care center funding, and there are 6 crisis care centers open in the state. Now, there are plans for 1 or 2 more. Once we get to 8, probably that's where they're going to slow down. But they're open now in Birmingham. Beacon Parkway West is, if anybody remembers the old UAB mental health facility on Beacon Parkway West, that's where the JBS is called the Craig Crisis Care Center, named after Dr. Craig, the former executive director of JBS. The Craig Crisis Care Center is in Birmingham. Wellstone runs one in Huntsville. Then there's one in Montgomery. There's one in Mobile. There's one in Tuscaloosa, which we were very glad to get because before the one in Tuscaloosa opened, all the Tuscaloosa folks were coming to us. And then last week, they opened Crisis Center number 6 in Dothan. So, Sean, I'm going to stop right there and I won't talk about my 40-hour stuff here because I want to tell everybody the difference to a law enforcement officer in how they handle things with a crisis care center as opposed to before the crisis care center existed. So I'm just going to talk about Birmingham because that's the experience I have. But every law enforcement officer I tell you I've talked to in the state says their experience is very similar to this. Because there's always been rules that a law enforcement officer could take into protective custody a person with mental illness or substance use disorder and take that person to a designated facility and put them into healthcare, right? There's generally always been rules about that in the law. The problem with it is before the Craig Crisis Care Center opened 2 years ago this week, the designated facility in Jefferson County, Alabama, was the UAB emergency room. So I'm going to let that sink in for everybody just a second and ask, have you ever been to the UAB emergency room? We may have people on this line who work at the UAB emergency room. They are great people. They do amazing work. One of my good friends got shot this is 25 years ago. Nothing, it was 40 years ago because we were students at Samford at the time. And he went to the UAB emergency room and they saved his life. And I have incredible respect for those people. But if our law enforcement folks took a mentally ill individual to this designated facility at UAB emergency room, here was their experience. They go up to the front desk and they say, I've got an individual here who's in crisis because of mental health or addiction. They need crisis care. It's the only place I can take them. It's the UAB emergency room. You know what you're told? Here you go. Here's the forms. Go sit over there and wait. The typical wait time was 10 and a half hours. That's the usual wait time, 10 and a half hours, the median wait time. The shortest wait time I ever had a deputy tell me about was 4 hours. The longest was 16 hours. Typical wait time over 10 hours. Well, I want y'all to think about for a minute, if you're a citizen of Jefferson County, do you want your patrol deputy sitting at UAB emergency room for 10 hours waiting to take somebody into crisis care? No. You want them out patrolling the street. You want them out finding the real criminals. You want them out, investigating murders and making sure people don't get shot, things like that. That's what we want patrol deputies doing. And if it was someone who had a history of violence, UAB would require 2 deputies to sit with them for 10 hours. So we had patrol deputies being taken off the rounds. So I went to Phoenix, Arizona, because I had heard Phoenix had this great crisis care system. So I went, Jim Kriego, who's the executive director of JBS now, Jim and myself and some of his staff, we all went to Phoenix together to observe how their crisis care centers worked out there. And they have a long-standing, mature system of bringing folks into crisis care. So we're touring the facility, and they've got, we ended up modeling a lot of the facility here on the one in Phoenix. It was such a great experience out there. But the most important part of that experience to me as a law enforcement person was, and I'm not APO certified, but I work for a law enforcement agency. I'm just a lawyer. But anyway, so the most important part of it was this: while we're doing our tour, the guy giving us the tour said, "Hey, y'all, hold up. I might have to have y'all step outside for just a minute because some of our Phoenix police officers have shown up outside and they've got somebody to bring in." And I thought, it's going to be a chance for me to see how long does it take them to get somebody into crisis care, right? So I hit my little Apple Watch with a timer. 6 minutes later, they had that person in crisis care. 6 minutes. Now, the Craig Crisis Care Center here, I've been checking with them. Their average wait time is about 15 minutes. It's right on 15 minutes. Now think about how much safer that makes the county if once, twice, 3 times a week, you got somebody who's not having to take 10 hours at UAB emergency room, they're taking 15 minutes at the Craig Crisis Care Center instead. That gets our folks out on patrol a lot more, and it makes the whole county safer when we do that. And believe me, my boss, if he talks about safety one time, he talks about 1,000 times. The responsibility is safety, Wayne. What are we doing to make the county safer? Let's make it a safer place. And that's what this whole effort is about, making the county a safer place for everybody. So, but you understand the UAB emergency room, they're dealing with people from car wrecks. They're dealing with people with heart attacks. And those folks are going to go ahead of an individual in a mental health crisis every single time, and rightfully so. But the Craig Crisis Care Center is a mental health emergency room that doesn't do anything else. So when that individual comes in there, they see a peer. A peer is an individual who has mental illness themselves. They've been trained. They've gone through it. They've got their medication right. They're probably still doing therapy and treatment themselves, and they're going through all that stuff. And that's the first person they see. They also see a nurse. They see one of the keys to it, Sean, is they then get followed by a social worker for 90 days following crisis care. And I was saying all that in answer to a question. So here's what happens to the folks that go there. The crisis care center is designed to have no one more than 72 hours. The goal is to have folks less than 24 hours. And many times that is what happens. What they do with the folks that they believe are going to be less than 24 hours there is they actually put them in a recliner. So each individual is assigned to a recliner. It's sort of in a one big reception area waiting room. These individuals stay in recliners. And of course, when I saw this in Arizona, this recliner system, I was like, well, is it dangerous to have these folks? And of course, the response is mentally ill people are not dangerous. They're just generally not. They're not criminals. They're not going to hurt anybody. They're really just in a crisis and they're trying to get care. And so they put them in a big, open area in these recliners, and the individuals can stay in the recliner up to 24 hours. If they have to be held longer than 24 hours, they do have 20 beds, and folks can be held as long as 7 days there. 3 days is the goal. So what happens to them when they leave? They go to a bed at UAB. They go to a bed at Brookwood. They go to a bed at Med Center East. They go to a bed in Tuscaloosa, wherever we can find a bed, or they go into an outpatient treatment plan. And if it's substance use disorder they're dealing with, they might go to Alethea House, or they might go to the Addiction Prevention Coalition, Pearson Hall, somewhere like that. If it's mental illness, they'll be assigned to a therapist, and they're assigned a social worker who then follows them for the next 90 days and longer if they want to. So they have a staff of social workers there. So, all right, let me go
We
back
have
to,
two more
unless you got
comments.
some, yeah.
I'll run
Yeah,
through
go ahead. Go ahead
quickly.
and read them, Sean, and then I'll finish out the 40 hour because we only got like 10 minutes left.
Yeah, Stephanie Lynch just says she remembers those experiences when I worked with DHR being a UAB ER with clients. Mr. Rogers was awesome at the VA, says Jason Doyle. He's why
Nice.
I'm here today. And
Great. Thanks.
one
Thanks for being here,
more,
man.
one more is the crisis center. This is Lauren Stewart. The crisis center has short term, which is about 72 hours stay, and long term, which is about a 7-day stay at the max.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. That's it. So getting back to our CIT training stuff, which I know is what we want to talk more about. I want to go through this, and this will be, we may not have time for some of those stuff I wanted to do, but I just wanted to make sure that y'all knew what a law enforcement officer gets trained on a 40-hour basis. So you see, they get the Dr. Sabrina Scott. She's the director of the Craig Crisis Care Center, and she volunteers her time and come and talk to our law enforcement folks and tell them what the Crisis Care Center is all about. Lieutenant Kim Grant is one of our patrol lieutenants, and she's got a real big interest in making sure these people are trained right. So we talk to them, you see, about personality disorders, psychotic disorders, assessment and committals. I do that same module that I talked about before. We talk to them about what drugs these folks are taking, and we get a PhD pharmacist that comes in and does that. Then there's the hearing voices, and y'all, if you've never done it, it is quite an experience. They put these headphones in and they play for you what is going on in the head of a mentally ill individual who is hearing voices. And it is terrifying, first of all. But they want the law enforcement folks to get the experience of, if you're the one who is yelling at this person and they're hearing all this other stuff inside their head at the same time, how do you think they're going to react? That's the point to the law enforcement folks. So second day, we talk more about different, we talk about substance disorders, substance use disorders. Cultural awareness is a part of it. Knowing, how to properly deal with someone based on their age, their sex, their race, things like that. We want to talk about that as well. Then we talk about anxiety. We talk about veterans. We talk about all the different things. So the first couple of days, you're really learning much more extensively what mental illness is. And then we get to suicide. You see up there at the top when Kelly Arthur from the VA comes and talks about VA suicide stuff. And then, and this is what I kind of want to get to, Tommy Black, who's the director of our academy, talks about policies and procedures, using the crisis care center, CCC use. She talks about when to use it, when to not use it, when do you have to charge somebody. She talks about one thing, the difference, and this is fascinating to hear her listen, the difference between an arrest and a protective custody is the paperwork. I mean, essentially, you treat the person exactly the same, whether you're taking them in protective custody or placing them under arrest. Then they do local resource panel, which is this is where the training gets so effective. They have people come in from the Birmingham Crisis Center. Emily Roebuck is just outstanding, from addiction recovery, from JBS urgent care. And then they have the NAMI family panel come in. And these are folks who have real life experience dealing with suicides one of them, her son committed suicide. Another one, her brother's been in and out of mental health care his whole life. And then when they have an actual peer come in and talk to these folks, and they're incredibly effective. Someone who's dealing with mental illness themselves, just gets to reach out directly to the law enforcement officers and say, hey, here's why we need you. And then I teach about legal issues and liability. And then on the Thursday, and this is a very key part of becoming a mental health officer, they spend most of the day out with people dealing with long-term mental illness. They go to a place out in Gardendale, which is a long-term living facility. It's a residential facility. Everyone there is dealing with mental illness. And they put on a panel. A bunch of the residents come and talk to folks. There was a guy out there when I went to a class last year who essentially credited a law enforcement officer with saving his life. So he was in such an addiction crisis. This one law enforcement officer just took an interest in him. He was in a homeless camp and had lost everything, and lost his wife, his children, his business, everything, and was doing nothing but taking drugs all day long. And this law enforcement officer just took an interest in him, got him to crisis care, and saved his life, and got him into the addiction care he was going through. So then we go through the de-escalation strategies, and the de-escalation scenarios become very, oh, notice on this one here, you wear plain clothes and leave your gun in your vehicle. So that's one thing. They don't want us to scare people, because honestly, because of the way they've been dealt with, a lot of folks who are mentally ill are afraid of law enforcement. And that's one of the things we hammer into them is, look, when you go out to deal with these people, they may be really terrified of you. So you need to be prepared for that. And they may, look at you a little differently than a normal person does. And then the last day is just all about doing the scenarios. And I did, Sean, if I can pull up this one, let me see, I'm going to pull up this on my screen here. This is one of the scenarios that I wrote and we use. And just to give you an example of what we have the law enforcement officer do. So we get two actors, and in my scenario, I'll just summarize it since we're running out of time. And this is a real life thing that happened that I was involved in. A man who had a brain injury, traumatic brain injury, and those people are dealing with mental illness, believe me, went in a rural store, picked up a bunch of stuff, and just walked out. Well, what'd you think the store owner's going to do? He called the police. This guy just robbed my store. When the police are coming out there, they get a call. There's a missing person, a man with a traumatic brain injury whose wife had just taken a part-time job as a bus driver and didn't think he would ever leave home. But he that day found a way to get out the locked front door, walked to the local store, and just started picking stuff up. And he had no idea. So what we do is we get these two actors to play this part out. And then we ask the law enforcement folks, okay, you deal with it. Go in here now and take over this scenario and show us how you would handle it. So Sean, I am out of time. I've gone too long. I'm sorry about that. But if there's any questions or anything anybody wants to say, I'll give a couple minutes at least for that. Oh, and you're muted, Sean.
We have a few more comments. Bridget Dunn says it would be great to have a part 2 to this, and 4 people agreed, and Renee Carpenter did as well. So if you'd like to come back in November, we have a spot open. If you want to finish, maybe get to where you wanted to get. Miss Taylor, Arlene says, I can see your passion for this field of work. It is refreshing to see such passion and belief in the care for the mentally challenged. Bridget Dunn says, thank you, Wayne. Oh, I'm sorry. You are very knowledgeable and passionate about this program. Happy Social Work Day. This is an absolute awesome way to celebrate today.
Nice.
Passion and action. Allison Early, thank you. Valerie Belinda, Langford, thank you so much. I second the request for part 2.
Oh, that's so nice, y'all.
Passion plus action. Great presentation. So I'll tell you all again, I'll read for you the link, and I'm putting it into the chat room for you.
Sean, I just typed my email in for anybody who wants to email me about possibly coming to the class.
That's great. And I'll also include your email when I email out the certificates. Our link is open today until 9. It's password protected. The password is CARE, capital CARE, and the link is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/ all uppercase letters with numbers, Z as in zoo, W as in Wayne, 3, S as in sheriff, 8, W as in Wayne, 6. That's our link. And our password again is CARE, and that is spelled capital CARE. I posted that in the chat room. Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. This has been wonderful. And if you want to come back, let me know.
I didn't even get through one page of 3 yet, Sean. So I'll be happy to come back. So
all right. We'll have to find a holiday in November to get you back. I think with part of this training, don't you have a standing meeting on Monday? So you can't.
I do. That's a problem. I do have a standing meeting every Monday at lunchtime. So that's why we had to do Tuesday. I'm sorry about that.
Well, we'll just schedule a Tuesday in November Thank y'all for being here. Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. It really was a fortunate meeting that I met your wife, and I hope her
Yeah.
painting is going well.
Oh yeah, she's doing great. Everybody's doing great here.
Good. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. We'll see everyone later. Have a great work week. We'll see you in 2 weeks when we present how to tour an assisted living community. Thank y'all. Have a great week.